I printed out the 3 images from Photoshop. The original and the first filtered version with a couple steps of gray. I've got black, white, and a medium gray, so it's just 3 steps. Oh, this seems to be okay. There's a 4th one in there, but that's detail. Not going to worry about it. And the last one, that's just purely black and white for some detail. I'm going to work on the original picture to show you what I'm using these as a reference for, and I'm keeping them up here for a reference. I'm going to draw directly on the picture, and the first thing I'm looking for is the highlights, the lightest areas, and I sort of flushed them out here, but down on this image, let's say somewhere in here would be the lightest areas. So it'd be somewhere in here. And I'm working on the original image instead of relying on the Photoshop one for the sake of this class for learning purposes, but also I come up with different translation than what Photoshop might. I'm looking for shadows. There's a shadow area here. There's one here. Obviously these dark areas. Look, and there's a little kind of in-between shadow under the chin, or above the chin under the lip. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a map for myself of the different areas, the different tonal areas, different areas of lightness and darkness. That's really all I'm looking for. There's a highlight on the nose. Now that I have that roughly mapped out here, let's get this deep shadow here. It's sort of a fumbling around process to find everything. And it can easily get too complicated, which is why I have the simplified versions here. So using particularly this one as my guideline, I'm going to make some straight lines. I like making this a little more geometric. This tail on the hat, I'm just going to not worry about. I'm going to ignore that detail. And I'm tracing all around with fairly straight lines. I would use the ruler, but I like straight lines, but I don't need them to be perfectly straight. I use this straight line technique to free myself from the more organic geometry. I tend to get caught up, and I find that a lot of people do, not everyone, but a lot of people get caught up in trying to have elegant curves. And by plotting things with a lot of straight lines, I find that I can create the curves within the boundaries of those straight lines if I need to. if the image is working with a bunch of straight lines, I just won't worry about it, making those more graceful curves. But it frees me up from worrying about or getting caught up too much in making things too perfect, because this step is just defining areas that are light and dark, making a map for myself that reminds me of where those areas are. Okay, I think I've plotted out the face pretty good. I might want to give this a little bit of a bend. Now the eye, the first thing I'm going to look at is the eye socket. Not too concerned about little details of the eye, just this entire eye socket. And see how the eye sits in there. So see, there's a shadow area here, there's a big shadow between the upper eyelid, or including the upper eyelid and the eyebrow. I'll define the eyebrow a little bit, but also the shadow area. And when things fall into shadow like this is actually kind of nice, because this whole area is just going to be a shadow. The one thing about the eye, the one detail I can define is where the upper eyelid ends and where the pupil and iris are together, just as a single piece. But I don't want to get into too much detail, especially at this scale. And this highlight, this white area, should probably follow these next shadows a little better. Now what I want to do, this is not a elegant drawing. This is, again, it's just a map. So I want to go around and make sure that everything's, like all the areas are lassoed, completely defined, that the areas are closed off, and there aren't any places where later on when I'm carving I have to guess. And that's pretty good. What I should do now is go back over this with a Sharpie, so it's easier to see through the tracing paper for the next step. Myself. This part is not about the details. I'm just creating zones that are lighter and darker than each other, surrounding them, defining them. The Sharpie is also a good analog for the smallest line I could make with my cutting tool on the type of linoleum that we are using, and still be able to print by hand. So that's pretty good. The next step is to plot this out on a piece of tracing paper.